on the future of the Northern Ireland
This meeting is
Protocol
being recorded.
and the EU-UK relations after Boris Johnson. It is held here at the Brexit Institute at Dublin City University, where the semester has just started. I'm Christy Petit, Assistant Professor in EU Law, Banking and Finance Law at Dublin City University and Deputy Director of the DCU Brexit Institute. It is my honor to introduce this event. Due to small technical issues, we will wait for a little bit to have Mr. MEP David McAllister, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the European Parliament, and we will jump straight into the roundtable discussions. So I'm very pleased to welcome Susan Lynch. She is a journalist at Politico Europe, and before joining Politico, she worked for the Irish Times as European correspondent and also as Washington correspondent. She has a PhD in English literature from Cambridge University. So welcome, Susan, and thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you very much, Christy, and delighted to be with you. Yes, as this is show business, as they say, we're kind of refocusing as we go here. So we're going to start with our panel discussion. We're waiting for David McAllister to come in. So thank you all very much for joining us. And I'm going to introduce our three panelists now. We're joined by Niall Moran, who many of you will know. He is Assistant Professor in Economic Law at DCU, and before that worked for the Legal Service of the Council of the EU and for the European Commission. And we're also joined by John McGrain, who's the co-founder of the British Irish Chamber of Commerce. And he is also the Executive Director of the Family Business Network Ireland and CEO of the tech startup Cayman.com. And also, finally, we were joined by Ian Cooper, who's a research fellow at the Brexit Institute at DCU. Before this, he worked at the European University Institute as a Jean Monnet Fellow, and he's also held academic positions in UK, Norway, and Canada. I'm speaking to you from Strasbourg, from a hotel in Strasbourg. Like a lot of Brussels-based journalists and politicians, we're all in Strasbourg this week. It's been a big week here. With the State of the Union address from Ursula von der Leyen. So I don't usually have this purple background, but I'm going to start by handing over to Niall, who's going to kick off our discussion today and give his thoughts into the state of play with Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Thanks very much, Suzanne, for those kind words, and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to a lively discussion on this topic of the future of EU-UK relations. So just by way of opening comment, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. She was a great queen and a great person, and I think that the people of Ireland will remember her as such. The UK is currently in the middle of 10 days of national mourning for the Queen. It's a time for reflection, and my reflections today on EU-UK relations will be done in a manner respectful of this time. So in my remarks, I'll be looking at two main areas. Firstly, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill and the likely EU response, and secondly, the question of a united Ireland. So the EU and its member states, they rightly see the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill to be a serious escalation by the UK, and the UK is treading a fine line here, as it is under an obligation to perform its obligations under international law in good faith. So the tabling of this bill by then Foreign Secretary Liz Truss could be seen as a breach of this good faith principle. Simply put, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is unacceptable to the EU as it would remove most of the protocol from UK law, and this is contrary to the UK's obligations under Article 4 of the Withdrawal Agreement that requires direct effect and supremacy in UK law. So the UK defends the bill under the principle of necessity in international law, but this doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So there's now a question of how the EU will respond to the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. If the bill becomes law, the EU will be ready and it's advancing preparations of its legal response at the minute. So it's generally seen that there are three options for the EU. And the first of these options includes responding by dispute settlement. So the EU can initiate this by consultation, followed by an arbitration panel. And this is a possible response under Article 739 of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA. So this option, it might be a precursor to other retaliatory options. And there is a view that the EU may consider skipping this step as it may not be deemed to be a response in kind to the passing of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. Dispute settlement under trade agreements, it's therefore disagreements between the parties about the legality of a subsidy or some other more mundane measure. But when it gets to the stage where a party is overriding parts of a treaty in its domestic law, it may be deemed to be more appropriate to just begin the process of ending the agreement. And overriding parts of the protocol is what the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill does. It's a flagrant breach of the withdrawal agreement, removing the economic provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol from UK law. So the more robust option of terminating the TCA would have to be on the table. Nonetheless, the EU may pursue dispute settlement, and the reasons for this include the importance of getting a legal determination and objective assessment of the protocol bill and the UK defence of necessity. So the UK government infamously acknowledged that its internal market bill would breach international law in a specific and limited way. So now the government is defending the legality of the protocol bill. It may well be useful to get the view of an arbitration panel on this. And I think that breach of the withdrawal agreement would likely be found, and the UK would then be required to take the necessary steps to comply immediately, as per Article 746 of the TCA. So if the UK complies with the dispute settlement, then that's a win for the EU. And if the UK does not comply, then the EU's hand would only be stronger entering into a trade war. The second option the EU would have would be termination. So this could either be as a first response or as a response to UK non-compliance with an arbitration panel's finding. The EU could give notice to terminate the TCA with 1 year under Article 779, and an alternative is to terminate what is usually described as the trade parts of the TCA, which could be done at 9 months' notice. So if the EU were to give either of these notices of termination, this would have an immediate and substantial economic impact on the UK, its exchange rate, etc. But it would also give the UK a period of reflection, 9 or 12 months, to reflect on the bill and the wisdom of it. The third main option for the EU would be swift retaliation via targeted tariffs or safeguards. And the options for this under the TCA include tariffs under Article 506 or possibly under Article 374. So Article 506 comes under the heading of fisheries in the trade part of the TCA, and there are certain requirements that must be observed here. Firstly, measures must be taken in response to an alleged failure in the area of fisheries. Secondly, it must respond in this area initially by restricting access to its waters, etc. And thirdly, if this step is taken, only if the response is not commensurate can you then target other areas, suspend preferential tariff treatment in other areas. So for the EU, this route isn't as clean as it may wish for it to be. There's also safeguards as a swift response under Article 772. If serious economic or societal difficulties arise, and this language is reminiscent of Article 16 under the Northern Ireland Protocol, but this wouldn't require disruption as a result of the protocol, so it's more flexible than Article 16 under the protocol. So as a conclusion, I think the EU would be better off going the more solid legal route of dispute resolution, even if it takes 4 months longer, 100 to 130 days. And it could even opt to do this concurrently with triggering the termination clauses I previously mentioned. So my second larger point concerns the question of United Ireland, and I'm aware that this is a sensitive topic to discuss this time, and my comments will focus exclusively on what should be done in Ireland to prepare for the possibility of referendums over the coming years. In terms of the longer term future of EU-UK relations, the question of United Ireland is obviously very high on the agenda for many Irish people, and so I felt it was important to touch on this today. For Ireland, maintaining a positive EU-UK relationship is essential, but it also must begin the planning for what a United Ireland would look like. It is a prospect that involves questions of great complexity, and the people must be in a position to make an informed choice. We've seen referendums run suboptimally in the past, both in Ireland and in elsewhere, and we should take the lessons from these experiences. So we should closely monitor sentiments in Northern Ireland, consider the criteria for when Ireland would deem a border poll to be warranted. The Good Friday Agreement refers to calling a poll when it appears likely that a majority would express a wish to form part of United Ireland, and there are indications that a majority is near at hand or will become likely as time goes on. There's already a consistent majority in the Republic that supports United Ireland, although this seems to be fair weather support in some instances, and it drops off when the prospect of higher taxes, etc., is mentioned. So this is why it's important to have an evidence-based discussion based on the best available data on the implications of a United Ireland. The debate should be as inclusive as possible, and we must try to preempt the risks that could beset a referendum, such as shady funding of campaigns, the spread of disinformation, etc. And it's incumbent on the Irish people and the government to get ready for this question. The government must set out what a united Ireland would look like, and discussions around unity require such a proposal, and discussions on constitutional changes will be needed to enable United Ireland to function optimally and sustainably. And that is why, in my view, we need to establish a special Oireachtas committee on Irish unity as a matter of urgency. We also need to look into citizens' assemblies, ways of testing the views across communities on what a United Ireland should look like, and what would be the most acceptable form of a United Ireland to all communities. I think it's hard to argue against, one, making sensible preparations for these questions, and two, observing the processes set out in the Good Friday Agreement on a poll for United Ireland. And I think that EU-UK relations would be best served by doing those things. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Niall. Great introduction there, both setting out specific options that are available now to the EU and opening up that broader question about Irish unity. We're going to go to pause now with our panel discussion and move to our keynote speaker, Mr. David McAllister, who's joining us now after a busy week in Strasbourg, no doubt. Mr. McAllister will be well known to many of you. A lawyer by training, he was also member of the Lower Saxony Parliament before joining the European Parliament. He joined the European Parliament in 2014 and is a member of the European People's Party, the EPP, the centre-right group in the Parliament. He's probably best known as chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and as a member of the delegation to the EU-UK Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, as well as other committees and delegations. So, Mr. McAllister, you're very welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing your keynote address.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. And first of all, apologies. I had difficulties, I don't know, trying to connect from Germany, but I'm so happy that I managed to get from Strasbourg to Germany on time to be with you. And because we lost some time, I would suggest that I don't hold any kind of keynote, but perhaps just make a few comments on the debate on the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland from the European Parliament and the European Union's point of view. And I can underline a lot of what Neil Moran just said, describing the different options we have. We are where we are, and the situation isn't easy. It's actually quite difficult. I would say that the situation as regards the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland is at a very low point. And what we are seeing is this new rationale set out in the UK government statement that the UK now finds itself in a state of necessity that leaves no other option than obviously to break an international agreement in order to restore stability and protect the delicate balance of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. So we have the impression that unfortunately there seems to be a point of no return in London. The mood, the position in the European Parliament across party lines is very much the same as it has been over the last weeks and months. The British decision to table draft legislation to disapply core elements of the protocol is regrettable. It is an acceptable unilateral move, and it undermines mutual trust. And this move raises concerns because of 3 points. First, the protocol is the solution jointly agreed by the EU and the UK to address the challenges posed by the UK's withdrawal from the EU for the island of Ireland and to protect the hard-earned gains of the peace process. Secondly, the protocol is an international agreement signed by the EU and the UK. Unilateral actions deliberately contradicting an international agreement are not acceptable. And thirdly, the withdrawal agreement and the protocol are the necessary foundation for the trade and cooperation agreement, which the EU and the UK have agreed upon to organize their overall relationship after the UK's withdrawal. I think there are 2 points which are underestimated in the British debate in London. The one is that the whole idea of the protocol was originally a British proposal. And we had different plans. Theresa May had different plans. And in the end, we were trying to square the circle. And the second point is this was jointly agreed. And I would go even a step further. If we hadn't found a durable, sustainable solution for the island of Ireland, who knows if the European Union, and especially the European Parliament, would have given a green light for the trade and cooperation agreement. So we're talking about a fundamental issue for us. That's why the European Parliament supports the Commission's stance to relaunch legal proceedings. You know that the proceedings were frozen for 15 months in order to create space for a genuine discussion, focusing on the implementation of the protocol, on the practical issues that people, businesses, and investors are worried about. Now, after the UK government's decision to break the protocol, the Commission would undermine the whole position if they didn't move forward on the legal proceedings. At the same time, in my view, the reaction of the Commission has been proportionate, it has been firm, and it has been calm. The European Union is not interested in starting a trade war. And Suzanne, you said at the beginning that you were in Strasbourg. Well, so was I this week. I mean, if you listen to the State of the Union speech of the Commission President, there are so many serious issues we need to resolve in Europe and all around the world that simply there isn't much appetite in the European Union having to deal with these kind of matters. We want to have a safe and well-functioning neighborhood, and that's why we deeply regret that we are still in this difficult situation. The final point, renegotiating the protocol is and remains unrealistic. Any attempt to do this would bring further legal uncertainty for people and businesses in Northern Ireland. I went to Northern Ireland twice last year. I spoke to a lot of representatives from businesses and civil society and academia. Most people were telling me they want the protocol to be functional. They want the protocol to be implemented. Apart from certain political figures in Stormont, I didn't hear really any calls to scrap or renegotiate the protocol. So if there's a political will and a commitment and a full respect of all the legal obligations under the two agreements the EU and the UK have negotiated, signed and ratified, I believe we can still continue to have a positive and stable relationship with the UK. But both agreements, the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement, need to be fully respected. And by the way, these two agreements are the result of the type of Brexit the UK government chose. There would have been different options which the UK government didn't want, which we respect. But that's why what we're dealing with now is a result of a sovereign UK decision to choose the very hard form of Brexit. I have spoken to Maroš Šefčovič again and again, and again this week. We will continue to work towards flexible solutions to lessen the impact of Brexit on Northern Ireland operators. From the very beginning, we have worked tirelessly to propose creative and durable solutions, showing flexibility regarding how the protocol could be implemented. And this week, once again, Maroš Šefčovič underlined that he is ready to go as far as possible. We in the European Union have shown that solutions can be found without changing the protocol, as was the case with the long-lasting solution on the supply of medicines, which was delivered actually in record time. So we sincerely hope that the new UK government will now have the necessary political will to engage in meaningful talks with the EU on how to make the implementation of the agreements we have in place work in the interest of citizens and businesses. Once again, I can only underline what I've said so often: the protocol is not the problem. The problem is the hard form of Brexit the UK government chose, but we are ready to find flexible, practical solutions within the legal framework jointly agreed between both sides, and this legal framework is the protocol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McAllister, for that. Just to say, we very much would welcome questions from the floor. We have Mr. McAllister with us for the next while, so please either type your question in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can bring you in and you can ask your question directly. But just to kick things off, maybe I'll just myself just a few thoughts. I mean, in one sense there, Mr. McAllister, you've painted as quite a sobering picture of relations at the moment. Are you hopeful at all, though, with this change in Prime Minister, that there could be, if this is a moment for a reset? I mean, do you think that it is a possibility that this can try and refocus the discussions, and that, if that there could be some kind of breakthrough?
Well, all eyes are now on the new UK Prime Minister and the new UK government. And I guess many people in Brussels and Strasbourg are asking themselves the question, what will they do? Will they choose a cooperation or a confrontational approach with the European Union? Prime Minister Truss is a well-known person in EU-UK relations. After the Brexit, she was the counterpart of Maroš Šefčovič, our Commission Vice President, in the implementation of the agreements we have. Of course, there's always hope that with the change of the UK government, there might be a shift in the UK position. However, it's obvious that the Prime Minister held a very strong line on the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland previously in her position as a foreign minister. If I followed the British debate correctly, during question time at the House of Commons last week, the Prime Minister pointed out that a negotiated solution with the EU would be the preferred outcome, but only if it covers everything that the UK is asking for in the Northern Ireland Protocol bill. So I think what we'll do now is, first of all, follow carefully what's going on in the Lords. I think in the Lords, there's not as much enthusiasm for the Northern Ireland Protocol bill than there is in the Commons. Then we will follow what the British, I understand, call ping pong. Let's wait and see how far the protocol bill gets this year. We might have to wait until next year. But once again, and Maroš Šefčovič has been very clear here, if the Northern Ireland Protocol bill becomes legislation, and if it is then implemented, this would have consequences on Northern Ireland's privileged access to the European internal market. So all lawmakers in London need to know that if actually this step is taken, the European Union might be forced to take action. So as the Germans say, die Hoffnung stirbt zuletzt. That means, I think translated in English, hope dies last. We're still hoping for a change of attitude, and perhaps the new UK Prime Minister can show, because he's such a staunch defender of Brexit, she can now show a bit more flexibility.
Yes, a hopeful note. I mean, one question I'm wondering about, what we're hearing a lot in Brussels is the argument from London that the war in Ukraine has benefited Britain, in the sense that particularly countries in the East, or the Baltic countries in Europe, are very appreciative of Britain's stance on the war in Ukraine. And, some of the messaging from London is that they're going to be on Britain's side, if you like, during the negotiations on Brexit. Do you think those two things are connected? Do they have a point there, that there's a bit more goodwill towards Britain by particularly the Baltics, the East European countries, so they're going to be more mindful of trying to see it from Britain's viewpoint when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol?
I think the United Kingdom has shown remarkable leadership since the 24th of February, and I would give full credit to Prime Minister Johnson for taking the lead. He's and we've all seen in Europe how important the United Kingdom still is on foreign affairs, on security and defense, and how deeply sad it still is that this great country has left our family of nations. So the European Union and the United Kingdom are partners, especially when it comes to a joint interest to uphold the rule of law and international obligations. We want to work side by side. So I would really praise and commend what Britain has done in recent months. But on the other hand, I don't really see where the connection is to issues around the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. Quite in the contrary, if the United Kingdom, like us, is so keen to defend the rule of law and also international obligations, why is the United Kingdom about to break an international agreement which was jointly negotiated, agreed, and ratified? I would say quite in the contrary, a lot of people simply have such huge difficulties to understand why there's such a lack of political will in London trying to find a proper, sustainable, practical solution for the situation in Northern Ireland. So
two separate issues, really: the single market issue on Northern Ireland, and then the defence alliance that's there, I suppose, through NATO. Really, that's the forum for that.
EU unity on that we need to protect our interests and to protect the integrity of the single market is as big as it was before. And I don't believe that should be a British strategy trying to undermine EU unity. It hasn't been successful and it won't be successful. Why don't we just sit down and get it done? And what we look, I'm not in any kind of form suspicious of being the most critical member of the European Parliament towards the United Kingdom and the Conservative government. And that's why I can say more openly, I simply do not understand why there is this lack of will to sit down and find solutions. I mean, we have shown again and again and again and again that we're ready to find a deal, but this has to be within the framework of the protocol and not by tearing up an agreement which has its origins, by the way, in the UK government.
Thank you. Again, anybody with questions, feel free to raise your hand or to put your question in the chat. I mean, on that, as you mentioned there, you know, we're just finishing up here in Strasbourg after a busy week. And I mean, I think it said a lot that there was no mention of Brexit at all in President von der Leyen's speech. There was quite a very glowing tribute to Queen Elizabeth, where she called her a legend, and she used her as an example when she talked about the EU's democracy, the idea of democracy, which was a lovely touch, but no mention of Brexit. I mean, what do you think that says? We did hear a lot, as you mentioned there, about like different trade deals that Europe wants to do. Von der Leyen said about, you know, building alliances with like-minded countries and using trade as a way of doing that. But is this an indication that really Brexit has kind of gone off the boil, that the interest in it is just not as strong as it once was here in Brussels and Strasbourg?
Well, I also listened very carefully to the State of the Union speech of Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and indeed, she didn't mention the United Kingdom at all, and it wasn't a part of the debate afterwards. This shows that in the meantime, we are dealing with such huge, enormous challenges that this is not a top priority for us at the moment. Our top priorities are the ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine, the inflation, the questions of energy supplies, energy prices, and all these kind of questions. And I also noticed this, that the media requests from you know, German quality radio and TV stations, they were much higher before the war started. Now this is just seen as a question, oh, we still have to deal with this. Have we still not found a solution, even though war has come back to Europe? And I would perhaps summarize the public opinion in Brussels, but also in Berlin, is at the British request, the European Commission has shown openness to discuss the implementation of the protocol in so many areas: state aid, VAT, tariff rate quotas. We have found flexible solutions. I mentioned the medicines, but the discussions should be based on the real needs of people and businesses in Northern Ireland. And once again, I mean, I went to Northern Ireland twice. Perhaps I was meeting the wrong people. I do understand that there are concerns as regards the East-West trade flows. And as the son of a British army officer, I would always uphold the importance of the union. And I fully understand the concerns in Northern Ireland. But even those people we were talking to, the business community from the unionist side, I hardly ever heard any kind of demand to scrap the protocol. It was always about finding flexible and practical solutions. And this is exactly what Maroš Šefčovič did. He went to Belfast several times. He sat down with people and he said, look, I'm ready to go as far as possible. I will try to go as close as I can to the red lines which have been drawn on my side. And this is, I think, why there's some disappointment in Brussels. We've done this again and again and again, and it doesn't matter what we want, what we do, obviously it's not enough. And that's why some have the impressions this might all be about domestic politics in London, and especially domestic politics in Northern Ireland. And there's absolutely no appetite at all in Europe, for good reasons, to get dragged into Northern Irish domestic politics, because life's too short to get dragged into Northern Irish domestic politics if you're not Northern Irish.
Thank you. I'm seeing on our screen, Audrey McCready has a question. Audrey, go ahead.
Well, that brings me precisely to the point that I was about to ask, if Mr. McAllister had any special message for the DUP, because they seem to be one of the stumbling blocks in terms of internal British politics and his approach to Brexit. I suspect he's going to say hands off, but anyway, I'd like to pose the question anyway.
I'm half Scottish. And in Scotland, I have also the position, but I'm strictly neutral. I never get dragged into Scottish domestic politics, never, ever. If you're dealing with German and European politics, you have more than enough to do. And it's the same with Northern Irish politics. If I go to Belfast, I meet them all. And I'm always happy to meet the DUP representatives, just as representatives from the UUP, the SLP, the Alliance Party, or Sinn Féin. And on the other hand, if Northern Irish visitors come to Brussels, I'm always happy to meet them all, because it's always important for us to listen carefully to what Northern Irish politicians have to tell us. I would always tell the colleagues from the DUP, reach out, come to Brussels and make your point. And there are a lot of people who are willing to listen very carefully what your actual concerns are. And if you are serious in talking about how to solve practical issues, then you have always a lot of partners in the European Parliament who will be ready to help and will be ready to facilitate solutions. But if it's about simple party politics or power politics in Belfast, then I don't think we would be the right people to talk to. I have spent a lot of time with DUP representatives and UUP representatives, and I'm fully aware of the concerns and the sensitivities they have, also now that there's a new parliamentary composition installment. Northern Irish politics is complicated. I think it takes you a lot of time to explain this all to an Italian, to a Greek, or to a German colleague, but there are people who are ready to listen. So I can only once again say that we do not want to interfere in any kind of way in Northern Irish politics. We just want to make the daily lives of citizens and businesses work.
Thank you very much. We have another question just on the screen. Claude Jean Alexis, I see you there with your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Mr. McAllister, there is something I don't understand. When you say you don't understand why the government, Johnson's government, but also the Liz Truss government doesn't show any willingness to discuss the Northern Ireland protocol. I mean, you seem to say that you don't understand, but I mean, isn't it a fact And whether you remain or Brexited, isn't it a fact that this story has something to do with domestic issues, ideology and domestic issues? And she's using this in order to stay, I mean, or to achieve, power, to go into a government because it plays well with her audience. I mean, can we say this? Or is it, I mean, it's maybe undiplomatic, but I mean, can we say this because can it be considered as a fact? Because it is a fact. They do not make any effort. And when the EU makes an effort, they just, don't respond. So why are you saying that you don't understand? Is it possible not to understand? Do you think really that there is a reason which can be accepted? A reasonable reason, if I may say?
I'll put it this way. Sometimes I just try to be polite and diplomatic.
Said
That
like
I
a
understand.
seasoned politician.
Look, you're talking to, we say in Germany, a Christian Democrat. In the Anglo-Saxon world, would be called conservatives. So you're talking to a German conservative who holds a British passport. And that's why it's rather unusual for a friend of the British Conservatives to criticize the Conservatives. That's why I'm trying to be polite and diplomatic.
No, then I understand.
What you just said, well, you may very well say so. I couldn't possibly comment. I think you know what I'm trying to hint at.
No, I do understand. I thought it was a program trying to understand what's going on, you see, not okay. So fair enough, I understand.
And I have given up discussing matters around the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland with my conservative friends.
Yeah.
And actually, I simply don't understand why we are in this mess. I just simply don't understand. And there are so many other challenges we need to face together. Why are we squabbling over months and years now? But okay.
Okay, thank you for that question. And we have another question coming in from Richard Jones. Does Mr. McAllister think it possible that the Prime Minister's hardline on the Northern Ireland Protocol during the leadership campaign was designed to appeal to the party members? This is exactly what we've just been speaking about. And that she might now be persuaded to put it on the back burner. Is her, I suppose, another way of saying this, not to paraphrase you, Richard Jones, but, is her work done and she's now the Prime Minister? I mean, she had to play that card maybe, in the run up to the leadership contest, but now she's there. I mean, do you think that's an element?
Well, that's why I said all eyes are on the UK Prime Minister. She's now in the lead and she can take a decision in the one way or the other. She has shown in the last few months as Foreign Minister that she was a hardliner on these matters. She was mainly responsible also for the drafting and the tabling of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill in the House of Commons. But now that she has gathered such great support from the Conservative membership, who are particularly in favor of a very hard position in the European Union, perhaps she might now want to reach out to more centrist people. It's up to her. As I said, we're still hoping for the best, but we are realistic by now. And personally, I don't expect a big change in the UK position on the protocol. If it's the other way around, you would see a very happy German Christian Democrat here.
Great. I mean, somebody's making the point on the chat as well. Brexit was a democratic decision of the UK citizens, and the UK was then a member state of the EU. So that's an important point. We have another question about energy security as well, a more Irish question, but we might get back to that with our panelists. So yes, you can keep the questions coming. I'm just going to move on now back to our other panelists.
Yes.
And we're going to hear now from John McGrain. So John, over to you, John, from the British Irish Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning, Suzanne, and thanks very much to our friends at Dublin City University for hosting yet another very high-grade conversation on these themes. We're very proud to be partners with DCU on a number of projects, and not least this one. And just to say, in case anybody's worried, pardon my appearance. I had, you should see the other guy. I had a minor accident at the weekend, but I'm okay now. Just picking up on David McAllister's analogy of a game of ping pong. I just checked on Google. A game of ping pong normally lasts between 10 and 35 minutes. This feels much more like the illegitimate child of a chess player and a Wordle champion, such as my wife. The chess can go on for weeks and weeks. And Wordle is really just about what's the word that's going to make this thing right in due course. And we've all been down those roads before, but let's see. I do want to start by echoing earlier remarks in condolence to the family of, connections of, and indeed people of Great Britain on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The British Irish Chamber was founded in the aura of Her Majesty's historic visit to Ireland in 2010. Followed by President Michael D. Higgins' visit the following year to Great Britain. And she was a great friend of many on this island, and we are glad to have had her support along the way, and we appreciate the pain of her loss to so many other people. The British Irish Chamber of Commerce is a apolitical trade organisation, fundamentally neutral, although as Charlie Hoy said, who are you neutral against? But we are a neutral political view organisation. We may have individual views, and indeed many of our trade members, of course, have political views, but that's not where we go. We keep strictly to the trade agenda. And we're unapologetic in the sense that we're the only organisation whose mandate is to be championing the work done and benefits created for communities by the businesses and their shareholders and their executive management and their workers across the two islands, north, south, east and west. Those firms employ more than 400,000 people directly, and we estimate that materially more than 10% of all households on the two islands, north, south, east and west, derive their income from the activity of British-Irish trade. And again, just to maybe reflect on where we're at, I mean, the context, even before Brexit, and it remains the case, is that Britain is, by some distance, Ireland's largest two-way trading partner. The US is Ireland's largest export partner, but taking imports and exports in aggregate, Britain is clearly our largest partner. It is remaining so, and I hazard to bet that it will remain so for some considerable time. The ties that bind are ultra extensive, long since the emigrant days, long since colonial days. We now have highly sophisticated businesses running highly sophisticated joint island supply chains and labour sharing and IP sharing and university research sharing, as Federico and colleagues know at DCU. So we are joined at so many hips, both economically, socially, belief systems in the Western world, et cetera, and there's very little damage has actually been done to any of those by what is a political act, and we respect the democratic vote of the people, but we also know that many people that we work with across both islands really want to get to the other side of this. It's not an our gift. We appreciate that Brexit has many other factors going on around it, and indeed we would probably say that the real issue with Brexit in terms of the tediousness of getting to the other side of it with resolution one way or the other, because all business wants to know is certainty. Business will absolutely respect the voice of the people in whatever markets it operates or is influenced by. But we've been living in a state of uncertainty since at least 2016, and we have complete uncertainty as to how long this uncertainty is going to last for. But business gets on with business, trade has got on with trade, and that will be the case. And it's already happening, not least in the microcosm of the Northern Ireland situation and the protocol. So I'll talk a little bit about that. If we look at the story on Brexit to date, in terms of our lens, for the reasons I've talked about, the reality is that real Brexit has been masked by so many other things. And if I was to look back on my own history book, I'd say we missed the key bit that Brexit wasn't going to happen in isolation of other things. Look what's happened. COVID, 2.5 years of utter disruption and great hardship for people. And thankfully, we're hopefully out the other side of the worst effects of that. That certainly masked the realities of Brexit then looming. But notwithstanding that, and notwithstanding Brexit, people were able to come together, probably in a very good example of how life can be cooperative nonetheless on things like vaccines and healthcare sharing and other such indicators like that. It's been masked more recently by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all that has fallen from that. And indeed, it's true to say that British trade and the British people have taken some very important steps in regard to working very closely with the European Union, to give the lie to the idea that the relationship is severed altogether in terms of the joint defense of Ukraine and the protection and the other related issues. It's also being masked by the broader issues that concern the British people. Cost of living, as it does Irish people and European people and everywhere else, the levelling up agenda that hasn't yet been delivered, and that's a commercial perspective, not a political remark. And the broader question of the health of the UK economy anyway. Some of it delivered a knockback slowly by Brexit, but others just as we have challenges ourselves. So citizens on both islands, because of deferrals by the UK regime, the UK administration, of the full effects of Brexit. I mean, bear in mind, for those who aren't so familiar with it, Britain has yet to enforce the substantial effects by regulations and everything else of Brexit. British people can still import with relative impunity, whereas European people have significantly greater hurdles to comply with in terms of importing from Britain into the European Union. The Northern Ireland has that magical dual status, and yet there are obvious difficulties around that as well. We would suggest a couple of perspectives from a trade lens only. The market has its way of still functioning. It will never stop. Business and consumers work together by finding the shortest route, just like water. And in the case of Northern Ireland, I'll echo what I think David said and perhaps others. The reality, and we have members on the ground in all parts, north, south, east, and west. The reality is that the great majority of businesses and employers, and as a result, their employees in the province of Northern Ireland, have a preference, given a choice, to retain the protocol on the grounds that it can continue to be improved. The agreements provided for those improvements, things like the joint committee, various other structures between the EU and the UK and its component parts, whereby the unknown unknowns then became the known unknowns, and now people should be availing of the structures that were put in place by consensus to say, when these things reveal themselves, we have ways of dealing with them, and they don't involve tearing the whole thing up. The latest in that, which we as a trade organization would point to, is that sometimes things have to come to a head commercially before people begin to actually form a view on whether they want it or don't want it. We might talk further about this with better brains academically than mine, but the idea of dual regulations, which is one of the latest sort of propositions to unlock this long-running chess game. Dual regulations is not a solution. It's the most divisive thing that could happen socially, and it is completely unworkable commercially, and that will be a vicious cycle in its own right. That may be a quite deliberate move to say, on your hands, be it, pick your regulation and go away. But that's not a way to solve something that's much more important than that for people on the ground, not least in Northern Ireland. Just moving on from that to allow wider views, there is a broader question of it's been touched upon, business people on both islands, but not least in Great Britain, significant international businesses, potential future inward investors into Great Britain, one of the biggest trading nations in the world, will be taking something of a sharp intake of breath at the notion, even if it's only a notion, that a country might consider breaching international law. We know what that's about. We're by no means there, but even the notion of it will cause risk registers in the world to come out rather more more frequently than might have been done in the months leading up to when that started to take place. The biggest thing from a trade lens is that, as I said, the uncertainty started when David Cameron pressed a democratic button to have a referendum back in 2014, 2015. And now, some 7 going on 8 years later, we still have no idea when the uncertainty ends. Business will respond to whatever unfolds, but none of this continuing uncertainty serves anybody well. Business is fine at the end of the day, but citizens on the ground are being deprived of the opportunities that Brexit delivers, because business will always find opportunities. And those opportunities are nowhere better and greater than in Northern Ireland. And it is really quite inappropriate, to say the least, that the opportunities for Northern Ireland of a significant spike in inward investment, of a significant reconstruction of jobs. Economic deprivation remains a significant issue in Northern Ireland, and none of us should stand by while people are, shall we say, fiddling in that particular regard. And then very lastly, on EU, UK, and indeed Ireland relationships. I mean, we're going through something. This will be a week in the history of time, if that much. It will get resolved, and not least the resolution concerning the island of Great Britain and the island of Ireland. It will be absolutely resolved. Diplomatic relations are at the lowest point since even before the Troubles, and that's bad. But nature abhors a vacuum. It will get rebuilt. The ties, geopolitical ties, social, familial ties, language ties, life values ties are none dimmed by any of this. And our job, I think, all of us, is to usher the process forward in the best, most effective ways with promptness, so that we can get back to the genuinely good relationships that have always underpinned our connections, and take care of the people who wait most for the jobs that resolution will bring.
Thank you very much for that insight from the business perspective, John McGrain. Very, very interesting angles there to consider. And moving on now to Ian Cooper. Thank you for waiting, Ian, from the Brexit Institute. Over to you. We're looking forward to hearing your views on the topic.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for this invitation. My role here, as I see it, is to give a political analysis, in particular regarding the position of the new Prime Minister. But before I get into the dirty business of politics, as we know, politics as usual have been suspended. And if I may say on a personal note that I'm a Canadian citizen, and so the British monarch is also my head of state. And so I just wanted to mention 2 days ago, King Charles visited Northern Ireland, and it was a very interesting visit that he made. And he's very much following in his mother's footsteps of trying to seek reconciliation between these islands. And so he went to Hillsborough. He visited the various party leaders, including Michelle O'Neill, and they shared some warm words. And there was a message of condolence from Alex Maskey, who's the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly. And so I found that all very encouraging in terms of peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. But I wanted to make a point also about that visit, more not even just a political point, but also a constitutional point. King Charles, he went to Scotland, and he was received by the First Minister in the Scottish Parliament. And tomorrow he'll go to Wales, be received by the First Minister in the Welsh Parliament. And these First Ministers will give a motion of condolence to the new king. But in the case of Northern Ireland, he didn't go to Stormont. He went to Hillsborough. Why not? Because he couldn't go to the seat of government in Northern Ireland, because there's no functioning executive in Northern Ireland. And so he met in a private capacity with Michelle O'Neill, but not in her official capacity as the First Minister, because she's not First Minister. She's just the First Minister designate. And in fact, the message of condolence that was presented to King Charles did not come from the First Minister, but came from the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly. And in fact, the Speaker, Alex Maskey, is not, he's the holdover from the last Assembly, and he didn't actually stand in the latest elections in May, and so he's set to be replaced. But of course, they haven't even held a vote to have a new speaker yet, and so it was so that's why he was in that position of giving that message of condolence to King Charles. And so anyway, the point being that the whole choreography and protocol of the visit underscored the political stalemate in Northern Ireland, and it showed that in one part of King Charles' realm, there is no functioning devolved government. But in any case, but I found that King Charles' visit to Northern Ireland was an encouraging sign, and his meeting with the various parties there. Now, that said, let me turn to the position of Liz Truss as the new Prime Minister, and thinking about things. So politics as usual have been suspended. So thinking really of where things stood 1 week ago, before the announcement of the Queen's passing, and basically that the fundamental fact remains that Liz Truss is in a very weak position, and because she's in a weak position in terms of the internal politics of the UK and in the internal politics of her own party, that gives her less room to maneuver and less room to be able to make compromise with the European Union. So it's not a good sign in terms of the likelihood of any kind of rapprochement with the EU, unless, and of course it's possible that could come out of kind of this period of mourning. Perhaps there will be a change in tone and perhaps a change in direction. But her fundamental position is weak. She's the first Conservative to become Prime Minister that was the second choice of MPs. So she was, and then she went on to be chosen by the Tory grassroots. And in fact, and it's almost ancient history now because we're going back to July, that she was in third place for most of the voting amongst MPs. It was only in the final round that she jumped up to second place when she won, I think, 32% of the votes of MPs. And if a few votes had been different, then we might be looking at Prime Minister Penny Mordaunt, because she was the person who got bumped from second to third place by Liz Truss. But how did she win that? She won it by uniting the hard right wing of the parliamentary party, the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and a large part of that was by appealing to hardline Brexiteers and people who want to take a hard line against on the European Union and issues like the Northern Ireland Protocol. And so basically she won by uniting the hard right on matters including EU relations. Now, and that was how she won. And then if you look at her actions, judging her by her actions of the first 48 hours after she became Prime Minister, well, her choice of cabinet shows that she wants to reward personal loyalty over competence or experience, and ideological purity over pragmatism. And so most obviously, her foreign secretary is a Brexiteer, but she's also put two Brexiteers into the Northern Ireland office, two former chairs of the European Research Group. So it doesn't get much harder Brexiteer than that. And that's Chris Heaton-Harris and of course, Steve Baker. And so those appointments indicate that there's going to be no softening of position on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And just to make, and also thinking again back to her first 48 hours, her last kind of political movement, her last policy proposal had to do with the energy crisis. She made this announcement in the House of Commons before all politics stopped, and it had to do with the relief package for energy. Now, what she said in her announcement was that her relief package will also apply to people in Northern Ireland. Now, that is complicated by the fact that there's no functioning executive in Northern Ireland. It makes it difficult to provide that relief. Though she said she would, but then kind of the technical details have yet to be worked out. But in any case, a couple of weeks ago, there was talk that the energy crisis could be used as leverage to try and get the Northern Ireland executive up and running again. In particular, use that leverage to get the DUP to finally sign up to the executive. But at least judging her by what we know about that issue and the way she intends to handle that issue, she seems unwilling to use that leverage. And so the evidence and in terms of what she's likely to do going forward, just today, the UK government announced unilaterally that it would continue to suspend border checks, and thinking about the kinds of moves that she could make in the near future. There's still talk about triggering Article 16. And of course, there's also the whole question about the Northern Ireland Protocol bill and its progress through Parliament. And so all of those, none of that augurs well for any kind of peaceful relations going forward between the EU and the UK. But in the current atmosphere then of reconciliation, perhaps I hold out the hope that cooler heads may prevail.
Thanks very much for that, Ian. A very good overview of the political dynamics characterizing the relationship now between London and Brussels. Just actually to pick up on that, we've some more questions coming in, and one of them will refer to that development today, which is there was a deadline today by the 15th of September for Britain to respond to the infringement procedures launched by the Commission over the summer. So we're hearing that a UK official in Brussels handed that into the Commission, but said they wouldn't be making any comment on that because Britain is in this period of mourning. But one question, maybe Niall, you might want to come in on this one, is do you believe that they're now, we know, asking for these grace periods to be extended? Do you believe the Commission is likely to grant this if and when we know they have London asks?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think that we have seen these periods rolled over before, and the big question obviously is whether or not the protocol bill will come into law. And just to maybe, I suppose one way of viewing it would be that it allows them to dedicate all the time to properly reflecting on that by extending the grace periods. But by not doing so, you could also make them think, okay, we're serious about this, and underline the legal consequences that'll be on the way otherwise. But my thinking would be that they probably would be extended again.
Yeah, I think so. And then we'll see if there are any parallel negotiation that's at start. Another question. This is a question from Art O'Mahony. To what extent do you believe the ongoing tensions surrounding the Northern Ireland Protocol have held up equivalence agreements being brokered in the area of financial services, something noted recently by the House of Lords European Affairs Committee? Niall, do you want to come in again on that one?
Yeah, no, I agree that it is very hard to deepen cooperation in various areas. We've seen it with data, areas like that. It is really hard to build on the trade and cooperation agreement while there are these fundamental questions, infringement proceedings going on. And yeah, the larger picture of EU-UK cooperation, it will obviously be held up while these these deadlines and legislations going through Parliament, and another cliff edge looms. So yeah, there is, of course, that it is going to have hit-on effects for cooperation, EU-UK cooperation in other areas. Yeah.
And of course, the British side say that they think this is churlish, that you know, Horizon, you know, the access of British researchers to Horizon funding and all that, you know, is this kind of delaying that. On the EU side, officials in Brussels say, well, we're not going to sign up to anything else. We can't trust, you know, Britain as a negotiating partner. So why would we do that? But it kind of, you know, it's a new concern for a lot of people if these other areas start to get dragged into this, you know, whatever the politics around it, it is a kind of a worrying development. We have another one here. Dan O'Brien has got a question. If Britain does not implement checks on goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain, where will the EU's external border ultimately be? Ian, what about that question for you? So I'll say it again, if Britain does not implement checks on goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain, where will the EU's external border ultimately be? I think this is a question the Irish government is hoping is not going to arise, Dan. This is but yeah, it's a very good question. Anyone want to come in on that?
Not only the Irish government.
Not just the Irish government.
Not only the Irish government.
Yeah. I mean, look, do you think there's a possibility we could be back at that, having that conversation again, David?
No, I think Ian should answer this question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think if I understand the question correctly, I think the ultimate kind of existential question for the Irish government is that they don't want there to be a border in the Channel that cuts off Great Britain and Ireland from Europe, and that's the danger from the Irish government's perspective. If these issues aren't resolved, if the EU is not comfortable with with imports coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, and the possibility that they would also enter into the rest of the EU.
This is the conundrum. David McAllister, while you're still there, just a question for you. This is a follow-up question from Richard Jones. First, a compliment. Your diplomacy and sensitivity to local politics is understood and laudable. But do you think there's any scope for the EPP to put any pressure on the UK Conservative Party through European Parliament, Westminster parliamentary links? Well, the first thing I suppose to say is that the Conservative Party, am I right, left the EPP and joined the ECR group under Cameron, am I right?
Well, exactly. That gives us Christian Democrats a bit more liberty to comment on domestic British politics, because we simply don't have a sister party in the United Kingdom. The UK Conservatives used to be part of our family. They were never a member of the EPP party, but they were a member of the EPP political group in the European Parliament. And it was under David Cameron that the decision was taken to leave the EPP group in the European Parliament. And for me, that was the beginning of the end, because then the alienation between the British Conservatives and continental centre-right parties perhaps began. So our only sister party involved in this whole process is Fine Gael in Ireland. And Fine Gael plays an important role in shaping the EPP's position on all the matters around the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. We listen very carefully to what colleagues like Leo Varadkar or Sean Kelly or others have to tell us. But we still have good informal and some formal contacts to the UK Conservatives, and we agree on many matters. But since Brexit, things have always changed. We simply don't agree on a number of matters, and I was trying to be as diplomatic as possible. I don't understand all the effort invested in this question of the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland. I simply believe the best would be to just listen to what people are saying in Northern Ireland. Perhaps I'm meeting the wrong people, but those people I meet are saying, we're not interested in ideological questions. We want to have our things fixed here on the ground.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very good point. I mean, just it reminds us that was seen as a very, short-term move by David Cameron that time, taking the Conservatives out of the EPP at a time when Angela Merkel, was the leader of Germany and EPP, and the decision there was I think a bad one, by Cameron, back then. The Federico, I see your hand up there, Federico Fabrini, who's joining us from Princeton, if I'm not mistaken. Would you like to contribute your question, please?
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I wanted to take advantage of having still David in the call, and wanted to thank David for joining us this afternoon in Europe, morning in the US. And David, if you allow me, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about the EU-UK Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. I was curious to understanding what role the Assembly is seeking to play. I know you're sitting in it, and so you know the inside view on it. And do you think potentially that could become an alternative negotiating space for EU-UK relations, in addition to the intergovernmental bodies created by the Withdrawal Agreement and the Trade and Cooperation Agreement?
Well, as regards to the European Parliament, we have, on the one hand, a new structure in the European Parliament called the UK Contact Group, which is chaired by the three chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committee, which is myself, and then we have the chairman of the Trade Committee, Bernd Lange, and we have the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Security and Defence. So we are the first point of contact, together with all the other members of the UK Contact Group, including some Irish colleagues like Barry Andrews and others. So we are the first point of contact when the Commission is coming up with new proposals as regards the implementation of the Withdrawal Agreement and the TCA. Now, on the UK Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, this has been established. It is following the UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, where both sides agree that there should also be a parliamentary dimension of our cooperation. The UK PPA includes 35 members from each European Parliament and the UK Parliament. We had a meeting before the summer break. I think it was in May, and I must say that these were extremely interesting debates on a wide range of issues, and it was practically for the first time that actually representatives of both sides got together, and it was actually, and that is a bit different than some other parliamentary partnership delegations we have in the European Parliament. It was actually an exchange of views, and it was a lively exchange of views. And I thought there was a high level of ambition in making a real contribution to the work of the Partnership Council. So we as a UK PPA will always be informed about the EU-UK Partnership Council's decisions, and we can also make recommendations to it. And I would always argue that we should exactly do so. So the second meeting of the PPA is going to take place 7th and 8th of November in London. I will be there once again, and I'm looking very much forward to actually debating these matters with representatives of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. I think that our chair, Nathalie Loiseau, on our side until now is doing a good job, and we should keep this UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly up and running.
Can I say something?
Yes, come on, you can come in there, Ian.
I've been studying the work of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, and I watched the first meeting that took place in May, and it was very, very interesting. So Maroš Šefčovič was there, and he stated the EU position, and Liz Truss was supposed to be there, but in the end she pulled out and was replaced by a junior minister, Michael Ellis, who stated the UK government's position. And what was ironic about this is that this Parliamentary Partnership Assembly is supposed to be kind of a joint scrutiny group overseeing kind of the Joint Committee and the Partnership Council. But if that executive body is completely divided, then because the EU and the UK were just completely in complete disagreement, and that was obvious, then it's not clear what the role of the scrutiny role that this parliamentary body is supposed to do in relation to the executive body.
Well, Mr. Cooper, if you were there, you might have noticed that Maroš Šefčovič was really emotional, very lively. I've never experienced him like that before, and I really enjoyed every single word he said, and also the way he said it. I'm not sure that all our British counterparts enjoyed his speech, but we did.
Yeah, he's usually so inscrutable, but that was the one time he showed that bit of, dare I say it, frustration. Yeah. Very interesting.
I'm sorry, but I'm off. I have to be at 6 o'clock in the fishing port of Cuxhaven. Constituency work is always important for Germans. I'm sorry.
Oh, good to see the MEPs at work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're almost
you,
coming
David.
to an end. Thank you very much again. Just a final question. I might bring in John on this one. We had an interesting question there, or if anyone, one of our panelists, which I think is very interesting. Are there any discussions happening around Ireland's energy security if the UK chooses not to cooperate? That's an interesting one. I mean, we knew this during the Brexit discussions about the whole energy angle, and now we're in the midst of a massive energy crisis in Europe. And are you hearing that, John, from any of your members, concerns about this whole energy angle to Brexit?
Of course, and you know, heightened obviously by the concerns now from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it would always have been, dare I say it, in an inappropriate phrase, a soft target. And I might point to other soft targets, research collaboration across these islands. And, you know, I heard the word churlish mentioned earlier on in response to Britain's appeal to, if you like, reinstate the research cooperation, Horizon Access and things like that. These are the casualties at very macro level, like big institutional connectivity that took care of a lot of things on these two islands and beyond that we kind of took for granted. And certainly energy connectivity in both the short term and the longer term towards the green agenda depends on the fabric in every sense that has served us well so far. You can be sure people are looking very carefully at where the wires are and where the pipes are and who they have to pass through within these two islands, just as much as is happening in a different context elsewhere on the continent of Europe. And in some ways, those types of connectivities that serve people really well, as we've just mentioned, are also assets towards the idea of reconciliation here, because nobody really wants those things to be damaged by the outcomes of these political events. Everybody knows the hard work that was done to establish those connectivities in every sense, and everybody wants them to be held secure by whatever outcomes we get from this phase.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Before I pass over to Christy Petty, thank you very much to all our panelists for a really, really interesting discussion. And I'll pass you back now to Christy.
Thanks a lot, Susan. Just a few words of conclusion. Sincere thanks to MEP David McAllister, who managed to stay with us almost until the end. And of course, warm thanks to our panelists, John, Jan, Niall, for your remarks and very engaged discussion. And a special thanks to Suzanne for your excellent moderation. And last but not least, thanks to our audience, because you attended in big numbers today, probably over 160 persons over the 1.5 hours of discussions we had. So it showed how timely it is and how important it is to engage on these issues and this topic. And that was the first event of this academic year at the DCU Brexit Institute. So of course, we invite you to really follow our activities, to sign up and subscribe to our newsletter. And just to signal that this event has been recorded, so you will be able to watch it later on the YouTube channel in case you could not join from the beginning or you missed part of it for whatever technical reasons. And yes, I wish you all a pleasant remaining of the day, and we'll be very happy to welcoming you again at the DCU Brexit Institute. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.